On a crisp autumn afternoon in a quiet neighborhood of Columbus, the streets were unusually still. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light over rows of neatly lined houses. Children's laughter echoed faintly from yards, and the occasional car hummed along Maple Street. Among these familiar sights and sounds, 3-year-old Liam Carter, wearing his favorite red hoodie, had quietly slipped past the backyard gate. It was a gate his mother thought securely closed, a gate she believed would keep him safely inside while she tidied the kitchen. Liam was small for his age, curious and adventurous beyond measure. His little legs carried him across the yard, brushing past fallen leaves that crunched beneath his sneakers. The crisp air tingled on his cheeks, and the world felt larger and stranger than it ever had before. He was drawn forward by something unseen, the flutter of a bird, the swish of a stray leaf, the bright reflection of sunlight off a parked car's windshield. In his mind, he was an explorer, a brave adventurer on a mission, unaware of the dangers around him. But what Liam didn't know was that he had wandered farther than he ever had before. The gate clicked softly behind him, leaving no barrier between him and the street. Maple Street, lined with parked cars and bordered by maple trees shedding their red and orange leaves, seemed quiet, too quiet. And then it happened. A sudden wave of weakness washed over him. His legs buckled beneath him and the world tilted. Liam had an undiagnosed drop in blood sugar, a dangerous condition that had never been detected. He tried to call out, but no sound came. His small body hit the sidewalk with a muted thud. A few leaves scattered around him in the breeze, his red hoodie blending almost completely with the autumn scenery. He lay still, barely breathing. Cars passed slowly, unaware. The afternoon continued its routine as if nothing had happened. Neighbors peeked through windows, but their attention quickly returned to their lives. Yet in the silence, a pair of sharp, observant eyes noticed him. Underneath the porch of one of the nearby houses, a scruffy brown dog stirred. The dog, known by some in the neighborhood as Rusty, had no home, no owner, and no one to call him their own. His fur was matted, ears nicked from past encounters, and his eyes wary and cautious of humans. Rusty survived by scavenging, stealing scraps, and hiding from people who would only chase him away. He had wandered these streets for years, unseen and unnoticed by the families who lived comfortably behind their white fences. But that afternoon, Rusty lifted his head. He sniffed the air, ears twitching, and his gaze fell on Liam. The boy's tiny body lay motionless on the cold sidewalk. Something instinctive stirred within Rusty, a primal sense that told him this child was in danger. His instincts, honed by years of surviving the streets, told him that he needed to act. For the first time in a long while, this stray's focus was not on himself, but on someone else entirely. Rusty emerged from the shadows of the porch, stepping carefully onto the leaf-strewn sidewalk. He moved slowly, his nose twitching as he approached the small figure. Liam didn't move. Rusty nudged his hand gently, then again, as if trying to rouse him. The boy's red hoodie was soaked with his own sweat, and his tiny hands lay limp beside him. Still, there was no response. Rusty's tail lowered slightly, his ears flattening in concern. This wasn't play, this wasn't territory, this was serious. A low whine escaped Rusty's throat. He circled Liam once, then twice, sniffing urgently, nudging him with more force. The boy's breath was shallow. Rusty's instincts screamed at him. He had to get help somehow. Usually, this dog avoided humans. Usually, he ran at the first sign of movement. But now, the thought of leaving the boy alone on the sidewalk was unbearable. Suddenly, Rusty's ears perked up and he let out a sharp, piercing bark. One bark, then another. It was a sound unlike his usual wary warnings. It was desperate, urgent, demanding attention. Rusty ran a few steps toward the street and barked again, circling back to Liam as if saying, "Notice him, please." The first passerby, a man walking home from work, glanced at the dog and rolled his eyes. "Scruffy mutt," he muttered, trying to ignore it, but Rusty's persistence grew. He ran closer, barking repeatedly, packing and circling the boy, refusing to leave. The man slowed, finally noticing the small, motionless figure lying among the fallen leaves. His heart stopped. He called out, "Hey, kid, are you okay?" No response. Within moments, a woman walking her dog approached, puzzled by Rusty's behavior. She watched as he barked, nudged, and circled the child. Her gaze fell on Liam's still body. Panic gripped her chest. "Oh my God!" she shouted, rushing to his side. Rusty pressed close, staying between her and the child as if guarding him. The woman fumbled for her phone and dialed 911, her hands shaking. "There's a child on Maple Street. He's unconscious," she yelled. Rusty continued to bark, occasionally nudging the boy, refusing to leave his side. Passers-by began to gather. Cars slowed. Windows opened. Finally, people were paying attention. Finally, someone recognized the danger. Rusty's role had shifted from a silent observer to an active protector. He didn't care about being chased away or ignored anymore. He had found his purpose: to save this small human who lay helpless on the cold pavement. And in those moments, with every frantic bark, every nudge, every packing step, Rusty became more than a stray dog. He became a lifeline. Minutes stretched like hours as the emergency dispatcher calmly instructed the woman on how to monitor Liam's breathing and pulse. Rusty remained vigilant, ears pricked, eyes scanning for movement, unwilling to leave the boy alone even for a second. The connection between child and dog, instinctual and immediate, had already begun. Liam may have been unaware, but Rusty understood fully. Time was critical, and every second mattered. And then in the distance, the faint wail of sirens began. Rusty's tail stiffened, his eyes fixed on the approaching vehicles. Help was coming, but he didn't relax. He continued to circle Liam, pressing close, ensuring no one, not even well-meaning strangers, could accidentally hurt the child. For Rusty, the world had narrowed down to one mission: keep Liam safe. By the time the first paramedics arrived, Rusty had cemented his role. He wasn't just a dog anymore. He was a guardian, a silent hero whose instincts had aligned with fate. And the quiet autumn afternoon in Columbus would be remembered not for its stillness, not for the gentle rustle of leaves, but for a small child, a brave dog, and the first moments of a bond that would change both of their lives forever. The sirens grew louder as the paramedics sped down Maple Street. But Rusty didn't move. The scruffy brown dog, whose life had been spent avoiding humans, stood sentinel beside Liam, unwilling to leave the boy's side. His fur bristled with tension, ears perked, eyes scanning the approaching emergency vehicles. This was no ordinary afternoon. The stakes were life and death, and Rusty seemed to understand that instinctively. Every ounce of his being focused on keeping Liam safe. Rusty had lived on the streets long enough to know fear intimately. He had learned to dodge cars, hide from aggressive dogs, and avoid humans who saw him as nothing more than a nuisance. Yet now that fear had been replaced by an urgent determination. The child lying before him was helpless, small, and fragile. Rusty had no name, no home, no one to care for him, but he could care for this boy, and he would not let anything happen to him. The first paramedic stepped onto the curb, rushing toward Liam with a stretcher in hand. Rusty barked sharply, circling the man, warning him off. The paramedic paused, startled by the dog's ferocity. "Easy, boy," he said gently, but Rusty didn't back down. His growl was low but insistent, a message that only those paying attention would understand. "Stay back. Don't harm him." Neighbors peeked out of their windows, watching as the drama unfolded. Some whispered, "That dog is crazy," while others murmured in awe, realizing the dog's strange insistence might actually be protecting the child. Rusty continued to pace, barking and nudging Liam, refusing to leave even when a second paramedic arrived. It was clear that this stray was not just anxious, it was purposeful. Finally, the paramedics managed to gently coax Rusty aside, careful not to frighten him. "He's just trying to help," one said, noticing how the dog watched every movement, every shift in Liam's tiny body. Rusty's eyes followed the paramedics as they checked Liam's pulse, listened to his breathing, and carefully lifted him onto the stretcher. The boy's skin was pale, lips tinged with blue, and his small frame trembled slightly. Every second mattered. Rusty whined, packing along the edge of the stretcher, never leaving Liam's side. His tail remained low, but his eyes glimmered with intelligence and understanding. The paramedics nodded to each other, appreciating the strange connection forming between dog and child. This dog wasn't just present. He was vigilant, protective, and aware that a life hung in the balance. One neighbor who had come out to watch slowly approached Rusty, kneeling and extending a hand. Rusty tensed but did not retreat. He sniffed the stranger carefully, then returned his attention to Liam. The bond was clear. Nothing mattered except keeping the boy alive. He had become a guardian, a sentinel, and the silent hero of Maple Street. The paramedics secured Liam onto the stretcher and began their careful ascent to the ambulance. Rusty tried to follow, leaping forward and barking at the doors. One paramedic opened the rear to reassure him, but the vehicle was too small, and the boy had to be secured. Rusty let out a plaintive bark, packing back and forth as the ambulance's doors closed. The vehicle began to move, flashing lights and sirens cutting through the quiet neighborhood. Rusty ran after the ambulance as far as he could, his paws slipping on the scattered leaves, tail low, eyes locked on the flashing red lights. He didn't stop until the vehicle turned a corner and disappeared from view. Only then did he slow, sitting heavily on the pavement. Exhaustion threatened, but he remained vigilant. His mission wasn't over, not truly. The child he had protected was still in danger, and Rusty's mind refused to release its hold on the situation. Back on the street, neighbors gathered, whispering and pointing. Some called animal control, worried about the stray, while others shook their heads, murmuring about the dog's apparent heroism. "He saved the boy," someone said. "I swear I've never seen a dog act like that." Rusty's fur was matted with dirt and debris from the chase, his coat dull from months on the streets. Yet in those eyes there was a fierce intelligence, a rare courage born from instinct and necessity. Meanwhile, inside the ambulance, paramedics worked quickly to stabilize Liam. They checked his blood sugar, applied oxygen, and monitored his vitals. The child stirred slightly, his small body trembling from weakness and fear. But outside, Rusty's mind replayed every detail: the boy on the sidewalk, the frantic packing, the urgency of the situation. For Rusty, it was more than instinct now. It was purpose. He had discovered a role he never knew he was capable of fulfilling. As the ambulance sped toward Nationwide Children's Hospital, Rusty returned to the porch where he had first noticed the boy. He lay down, ears pricked, and waited. Minutes passed. Hours felt like minutes, but he remained there, alert to every sound, every movement on Maple Street. The neighborhood that had ignored him for years was now aware, if only vaguely, that this scruffy dog had done something remarkable. Rusty had always been a ghost in the neighborhood, unseen, unclaimed, and disregarded. But now he had become something extraordinary. He had acted when no human had noticed, protected a life that could have been lost, and refused to abandon a small child even when the world around him moved on. By the time the first news crews arrived, called by neighbors who witnessed the incident, Rusty was still there, waiting patiently. Reporters snapped photos of the brown stray dog sitting in the autumn leaves, his eyes alert and filled with something that could only be described as quiet determination. Social media would later call him a hero, and strangers would marvel at his actions. But at that moment, Rusty didn't understand fame or recognition. All he understood was that he had saved a life. Hours later, after Liam was stabilized in the hospital, Rusty remained on Maple Street. Volunteers from local animal rescues began searching for him, trying to coax him into their care. Rusty, wary as ever, did not trust easily. He allowed them to approach, but only cautiously. There was a distance between Rusty and humanity that had been forged over years of survival, yet something had shifted in him. Whatever fear or distrust he had felt before, it now coexisted with purpose. He had learned that sometimes, taking a risk, facing humans, approaching strangers could save a life. That afternoon would mark the beginning of a bond that no one could have predicted. The small boy in the red hoodie and the scruffy brown dog had found each other in the most unexpected of ways. Rusty had become more than a stray. He had become a protector, a silent hero, and a reminder that courage comes in all shapes, sizes, and coats of fur. and as the sun dipped lower behind the rooftops of Columbus, Rusty sat on Maple Street, his eyes scanning every shadow, listening for the sound of the boy who had become his purpose. In that quiet, Rusty had found meaning. He had found a mission, and he would not rest until he knew Liam was safe. Rusty sat on Maple Street, ears twitching, eyes fixed on the distance where the ambulance carrying Liam had disappeared. The autumn leaves swirled around him in a soft breeze, yet he remained unmoving, alert to every sound: a honking horn, a crunching step on gravel, the faint wail of the sirens fading down the street. He had seen Liam lifted onto that stretcher, had felt the panic in the child's body through the subtle trembles, and had made a silent promise. He would not leave. Not now, not ever. For Rusty, every step Liam had taken had mattered. Every wobble of the little boy's legs, every stumble over the curb, every inhale of cool autumn air, it had led to this moment. Rusty had circled him, barked and nudged with precision, ensuring that someone noticed before tragedy could strike. Now, with the ambulance gone, he could do nothing but wait, watch, and hope. But the instinct within him told him the child's safety was not yet guaranteed. As the ambulance drove through the streets of Columbus, Liam lay unconscious, small and fragile, strapped securely onto the stretcher. Paramedics worked quickly, checking his vitals, monitoring his breathing, and stabilizing his blood sugar. The boy's tiny body shook slightly from weakness, and his face was pale, lips tinged with blue. One paramedic whispered under their breath, 10 more minutes and we wouldn't have made it. Outside, Rusty's presence might have been impossible to perceive, yet in some invisible way, his loyalty and protection were palpable, as though they accompanied Liam inside the moving vehicle. Back on Maple Street, neighbors had begun to gather. Some were curious, some skeptical, and some profoundly moved. Children peeked from behind their parents' legs, eyes wide. Adults murmured quietly to one another, "Did you see that dog? He didn't leave the boy for a second." A man adjusting his tie paused, glancing toward the porch where Rusty had spent so long watching. He shook his head in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like it," he said. Rusty, oblivious to the conversations, had eyes only for the distance, only for the boy. Hours earlier, Rusty had been just another stray, unseen, unwanted, a fixture of the neighborhood people barely acknowledged. But now he had become central to everyone's attention. Flyers were already being sketched. "Stray dog hero saves child." Social media posts were being drafted by witnesses who had caught glimpses of the drama. Rusty's fur was dirty, matted, and torn in places, a testament to a life lived outdoors. Yet there was a dignity to him now, a sharp intelligence, and a fierce dedication that demanded recognition. He was no longer invisible. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize Liam. The ambulance doors opened, and the whir of activity replaced the gentle hum of the street. Nurses quickly transferred the boy to an emergency bed. Monitors beeped, and oxygen masks were placed over his tiny face. Parents and medical staff hovered, worried and tense. Rusty's absence was immediately noted. In the corner of the hospital parking lot, the brown dog paced, watching every movement. He had followed as far as his legs could carry him, and now he waited, sensing that this was only part of the battle. Rusty's training was instinct, honed over months of survival. He could read subtle changes in behavior and body language, something humans often missed. He had recognized Liam's weakness, his sudden collapse, and the fragile, shallow breathing that indicated danger. No one had noticed at first, not neighbors, not passers-by, but Rusty had. He had acted, not out of loyalty to a human, but out of an innate understanding of vulnerability. For Rusty, it was instinct, yes, but also something deeper, a spark of compassion, unclaimed but undeniable. The community began to grasp the magnitude of Rusty's actions. Local news crews arrived, cameras clicking, capturing the dog sitting patiently under the porch, eyes never leaving the hospital entrance. Volunteers approached cautiously, hopping to coax him into safety. Rusty, wary as ever, resisted initially. He had spent years avoiding humans who could hurt him, yet there was a subtle difference now. He allowed the rescuers to come closer, sniffing their hands, testing their intentions. He didn't run. He didn't flee. His mission had altered the rules he lived by. Neighbors shared stories of Rusty's past. Some had seen him fend off aggressive dogs in alleys. Others remembered him stealing scraps from trash cans, disappearing before anyone could intervene. No one had ever imagined he possessed the courage and intelligence required to save a life. And yet here he was, a scruffy brown dog, waiting outside the hospital, an unsung hero who had risked everything. The contrast was stark, from ignored stray to the focus of admiration. Rusty had transformed, not because the world had changed, but because he had chosen to act. Inside the hospital, Liam began to stir, his eyes fluttering open. He was weak, trembling, and confused. Paramedics reassured him, applying gentle pressure, monitoring his pulse. For a fleeting moment, his tiny hands reached out, seeking warmth, security, and comfort. And though Rusty was outside, somewhere on the curb, his presence seemed to extend through the air, a silent reassurance that he had not been abandoned. Time stretched in those moments. Rusty remained vigilant, moving only slightly, tail low, eyes scanning every approaching person, every sound. He seemed to sense when someone entered the hospital, when a nurse shifted a stretcher, when a car pulled up. Each movement mattered. Each step could bring danger. And in Rusty's mind, nothing else existed except the small boy in need of protection. By the evening, the neighborhood had shifted its attention. Families came out of their homes to witness the steadfast dog, sharing stories with one another, marveling at his courage. Some tried to coax him with treats. Others attempted to approach him cautiously. Rusty, however, maintained his distance, his instincts finely tuned. He had survived on his own for years, but now his survival instinct had merged with purpose. He was no longer merely a stray. He was a guardian, and guardianship demanded focus, patience, and vigilance. Hours passed, and the city lights flickered on, casting a warm glow across Maple Street. Rusty had settled on the curb, lying down for a brief rest, yet his head remained up, ears pricked, eyes scanning constantly. The boy he had saved was safe for now, but Rusty could not relinquish his watch. He had discovered a bond, unspoken and profound, a connection that transcended language, species, and circumstance. He had become indispensable. As night fell, the wind carried the scent of autumn leaves and distant rain. Rusty remained alert, silent but unwavering. The world had shifted in a single day. A forgotten stray had stepped into destiny, acting courageously when humans hesitated. And while he could not comprehend recognition or fame, he had discovered something more important: the ability to protect, to care, and to make a difference. And so Rusty remained, the scruffy brown dog under the glow of the streetlights, watching, waiting, guarding. He had saved Liam, but he knew the journey was far from over. Somewhere inside, the spark of purpose had been ignited, a spark that would guide him, protect him, and define him forever. Inside the ambulance, the atmosphere was tense. Liam Carter lay on the stretcher, tiny and fragile, his red hoodie damp from sweat, lips tinged blue. Paramedics worked quickly, monitoring every shallow breath, every heartbeat, and every subtle movement of his small body. His little hands twitched involuntarily, a sign of low blood sugar and fatigue. One paramedic whispered to another, "If we had been 10 minutes later, we might not have made it." Outside, sirens cut through the late afternoon calm of Columbus, warning every driver that life hung in the balance. Meanwhile, Rusty had not left Maple Street. The ambulance's red and white lights faded into the distance, but the brown stray remained vigilant, packing along the curb. His tail was low, ears pricked, eyes scanning constantly. He had followed as far as he could, but exhaustion pulled at his muscles. Still, he refused to leave. Instinctively, he knew the child inside the vehicle was still in danger, that the job wasn't over yet. Rusty's loyalty was unwavering, unyielding, and silent, yet powerful. Back at the hospital, emergency staff were waiting. The doors opened as the ambulance screeched to a stop, lights flickering against the white walls. Liam was rushed into the emergency bay, paramedics reporting the situation to a team of doctors. Nurses hovered, preparing oxygen masks and warming blankets. The boy's pulse was weak, his body trembling with fatigue. One nurse glanced at the monitors and said, "We need to act fast. This is critical." Every second mattered. Meanwhile, the news of the rescue had begun to spread throughout the neighborhood. Witnesses who had seen Rusty bark, circle, and nudge Liam shared their accounts with neighbors, friends, and local media. Phones buzzed with photos and videos. The story of the scruffy brown stray dog who had saved a child was quickly capturing hearts across Columbus. Volunteers began calling local shelters, offering to help find the dog, unsure if he had been injured or was still waiting nearby. Rusty, unaware of the media attention, lay under a tree near the hospital parking lot. His breathing was steady, but his ears twitched at every sound. The opening of a car door, the distant bark of another dog, the hurried footsteps of hospital staff. Though he could not enter the building, he remained vigilant. His body, though exhausted from chasing and circling, seemed powered by purpose. The scruffy stray had never known true loyalty before, yet in these hours it had been forged instinctively, without hesitation. Inside the emergency room, Liam began to respond to the interventions. His eyelids fluttered and he whimpered softly, confused and frightened by the sterile surroundings and the sudden flurry of activity. Paramedics reassured him gently, monitoring his vitals closely. His mother, who had been called to the hospital immediately, arrived moments later, panic-stricken and trembling. Seeing her son on the stretcher, stabilized but pale and weak, she dropped to her knees beside him, holding his tiny hand. Tears streamed down her face as relief mixed with lingering terror. The mother learned about Rusty from the nurses and paramedics. "A dog, a stray, found him first," one paramedic explained. "He wouldn't leave him, not for a second. We barely managed to move him into the ambulance." Her heart wrenched. She had seen Rusty before in the neighborhood but had never thought much of the scruffy stray. Now gratitude and astonishment overwhelmed her. "We have to find him," she whispered, more determined than she had ever been. Outside, Rusty continued to wait. Shadows grew long as the afternoon turned to evening. A soft drizzle began to fall and the ground became damp. Rusty's matted fur absorbed the cold moisture, but he did not flinch. He remained focused, ears pricked toward the hospital doors, watching intently as staff came and went. Volunteers had begun canvassing the neighborhood, calling out softly, "Rusty, come here, boy." They left bowls of food and water, hopping to coax him closer. But Rusty's attention was elsewhere, to the child inside. By now, news crews had arrived, setting up cameras in the hospital parking lot and nearby streets. Neighbors gathered, whispering, watching, and occasionally snapping pictures. Rusty became the center of attention, yet he remained entirely uninterested in fame. His focus was unshakable, fixed on the mission he had undertaken without thinking, without planning. He had never known recognition, never expected it, yet he had already earned it through action alone. Inside the emergency room, Liam began to regain some color. His tiny hand twitched in his mother's grasp, and he blinked up at her tearful face. The doctors monitored him closely, keeping oxygen flowing and ensuring his blood sugar rose steadily. The mother whispered softly, soothing him, grateful beyond words that her son was still alive. And while she clung to him, a thought lingered in her mind. She had to find the dog who saved him. Rusty, sensing the proximity of the child's safety, let out a soft whine, shifting slightly on the curb. He had waited through the ambulance ride, the rush of the hospital, and the bustle of the staff. He had endured hunger, cold, and exhaustion without complaint. And yet, despite all this, he had never wavered. For Rusty, loyalty was instinctive. Courage was natural. Protection was not a choice but a compulsion. As night fell over Columbus, Maple Street quieted once more. Rain fell steadily and Rusty shook off the droplets, still sitting alert. The boy he had saved was inside, recovering, but the bond between them had already formed. Even from a distance, Rusty seemed to understand. He had acted alone, without guidance or reward, yet the impact of his actions was immense. One small, abandoned dog had changed the course of a family's life forever. Volunteers and neighbors continued searching for Rusty, leaving food and gentle calls. For a stray who had avoided humans his entire life, these attempts were met with cautious sniffing and careful distance. Yet something had shifted. Rusty's instincts told him that humans were not the enemy this time. That instinct would lead him, eventually, to the family who would save him as he had saved Liam. And in the hospital room, Liam's mother held her son close, whispering words of relief and gratitude. She promised herself she would find the dog who had risked everything to save him. The boy, oblivious to the hero waiting outside, drifted into a safe, peaceful sleep for the first time in hours. And Rusty, under the dim glow of the streetlights, remained vigilant, a silent guardian whose actions would soon become legend. That night, Maple Street was quiet once more, but the impact of a stray dog's bravery would echo far beyond the neighborhood. Rusty had proven that heroism could exist in the most unexpected forms, that courage was not reserved for the trained or celebrated, and that loyalty and love could come from the most unlikely places. By the time the night had fully fallen over Columbus, Liam Carter was finally stable inside the hospital. His tiny body rested under warm blankets, monitors beeped steadily, and oxygen gently filled his small lungs. But even with the child safe, one person's mind could not rest: his mother, Emily Carter. Her heart had been torn in two by fear, and though relief now softened her panic, it was accompanied by a growing determination. The child who had nearly been lost had been saved by a dog she barely knew, a scruffy, brown stray whose courage had eclipsed her understanding. She had to find him. Emily recalled the paramedics' account. The dog had refused to leave Liam's side, barking, circling, and nudging him until help arrived. A hero, the paramedics had called him. A guardian, one nurse had whispered. Emily couldn't stop picturing the small, matted dog packing anxiously on the sidewalk, alert and unwavering. For months she had passed by him in the neighborhood, barely noticing the stray who scavenged and hid. And now she realized he had done something extraordinary, something no human had done. Early the next morning, Emily returned to Maple Street. The fallen leaves from the previous day's drizzle were damp underfoot. The neighborhood was quiet, residents stirring for the start of a new day. Emily held a handful of flyers she had hastily scribbled the night before. "Looking for hero dog," they read, simple words but heavy with gratitude. She pinned them to utility poles, lampposts, and fences, hoping someone had seen him. Every corner, every alley, every porch became a possibility. The community quickly caught wind of the story. Neighbors began searching alongside her, calling out softly, "Rusty, come here, boy." Some brought treats, bowls of water, and warm blankets. Others simply walked the streets, eyes scanning for movement. Children peered from behind fences, whispering excitedly about the dog who had saved Liam. Even local news stations picked up the story, broadcasting it as a feel-good yet urgent call to action. Hero stray dog helps save child in Columbus neighborhood. Despite all efforts, Rusty remained elusive. Years on the streets had taught him caution. He approached humans only when necessary and never without suspicion. Yet slowly, the scent of kindness, the whisper of familiarity began to reach him. He had saved Liam. Instinctively, he knew the boy's mother would be looking for him. The knowledge that he had acted right, that he had done something important, seemed to give him the courage to allow careful approach. By mid-morning, a neighbor spotted Rusty slinking between two houses near the alley where he often slept. She called softly, keeping her distance. Rusty froze, ears pricked. He had survived on his own for years and distrusted humans, but something tugged at him, perhaps instinct, perhaps recognition. Slowly he approached the woman, sniffed her hand cautiously, then sat down, watching. Emily, alerted by the neighbor's call, hurried to the scene, heart pounding with anticipation. When Emily finally saw Rusty, she froze for a moment. There he was, the scruffy dog who had saved her son's life, sitting under a maple tree, eyes alert and filled with intelligence. She knelt slowly, speaking softly, her voice trembling. "Rusty, it's okay, boy. You saved him, you saved my son." Rusty's ears flicked, but he did not move closer immediately. Trust had to be earned, and this stray had lived a life of caution. Yet slowly, as Emily extended a hand and spoke gently, Rusty inched forward, sniffing and studying her with careful curiosity. Volunteers and neighbors gathered, witnessing the reunion from a distance. Some whispered in awe. "He's actually letting her get close," one said. "I can't believe it." Others offered blankets, food, and water, but Rusty's attention remained on Emily and the possibility of connection. In those cautious moments, it became clear. This dog had not only saved Liam, but he had also chosen to accept care, perhaps for the first time in his life. Emily knelt for several minutes, speaking softly to Rusty, her voice a mix of relief, gratitude, and awe. Slowly, she extended her hand closer. Rusty sniffed, stepped forward, and pressed his head lightly against her hand. Tears streamed down Emily's face. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. But Rusty didn't need thanks. He had already acted when it mattered most. He had acted without reward or recognition, guided only by instinct and courage. Once trust was established, Emily led Rusty gently toward her car, making sure he felt safe. Volunteers kept a respectful distance, allowing the dog to understand that this was his choice. Rusty followed slowly, cautious yet willing. It was a profound moment. The stray who had lived in fear for years had begun to accept humans, guided by the bond he had formed with Liam. The community's involvement did not wane. Word of Rusty's heroics spread through social media and local news. Messages of admiration poured in from neighbors, strangers, and animal lovers across the city. Emily and the volunteers organized a small network to ensure Rusty would be safe, fed, and monitored. Yet Emily understood that the greatest gift they could offer him was choice, the freedom to decide whether to trust them or remain on the streets. Back at the hospital, Emily reunited Rusty with Liam under careful supervision. Liam's small arms reached out instinctively, recognizing the familiar scent of the dog who had saved him. Rusty approached cautiously, sniffing the child's red hoodie, circling slowly, and then resting his head gently against Liam's chest. Nurses and volunteers watched, some wiping tears from their eyes. The bond that had begun on the sidewalk was now tangible, undeniable, and deeply emotional. The moment cemented something extraordinary. A dog who had been ignored, abandoned, and avoided had become a central figure in a family's life. He had acted heroically without thought of reward, yet his bravery had changed everything. For Rusty, there was no fame, no applause. He had only acted out of instinct, loyalty, and courage, qualities that were often overlooked in humans, but innate in him. That afternoon, Emily and volunteers worked to ensure Rusty's immediate needs were met. They provided warm water, food, and a place to rest, but more importantly, they respected his autonomy. Rusty had chosen to save Liam, and now he would have the freedom to choose how much of himself to give to this new family. The trust that formed in those hours would become the foundation for a bond that no time, distance, or circumstance could break. By evening, the neighborhood began to celebrate Rusty quietly. Neighbors who had once chased him away now called him hero. Children left small treats along the sidewalk. People shared stories, grateful to witness the courage of a dog who acted when it mattered most. Rusty, despite the attention, remained humble, his focus always on the boy he had saved. And as the sun set over Columbus, Emily Carter sat beside Liam and Rusty, holding her son close, stroking Rusty's matted fur, and marveling at the chain of events that had unfolded. A child's life had been saved, a community had been touched, and a stray dog had found purpose. The hero of Maple Street had finally found the humans who would honor him, care for him, and love him. And in that quiet, golden evening light, the bond that had begun in crisis was solidified, ready to carry them through a lifetime of shared moments, loyalty, and unconditional love. The next morning, the first golden rays of sunlight filtered through the hospital windows, casting a warm glow over Liam Carter's room. The boy stirred slightly, his tiny fingers curling around the blanket and his eyelids flickered open. Beside him, Rusty sat quietly, ears pricked, head tilted in careful observation. It had been only a day since the events on Maple Street, yet in Rusty's mind, the world felt different, safer, more purposeful, and filled with strange but fascinating humans who seemed to care for him without threat. Rusty's life until now had been a series of challenges, scavenging for food, avoiding aggressive dogs, navigating streets filled with dangers, and eluding humans who often chased him away. Trust had been a foreign concept, fleeting and rare. Yet today he found himself at the center of attention, surrounded by people who only wanted to ensure his safety and well-being. His instincts warned him to stay cautious, but something deeper had been awakened, a bond with the child he had saved. Emily, Liam's mother, knelt beside the boy's bed, softly stroking Rusty's matted fur. "You're a brave boy, aren't you?" she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. Rusty pressed his head closer to Liam, allowing the gentle touch, sensing the boy's fragility and need for comfort. The nurses watched quietly, amazed at the unusual relationship. A scruffy stray, abandoned and wary, had become a protector, a guardian angel who would not abandon the boy. The hospital staff had been briefed on Rusty's arrival. They were initially cautious, unsure how a stray dog might behave in a medical environment, but Rusty had surprised them. Calm yet alert, he remained close to Liam without causing disruption. Monitors beeped and the usual hospital hustle continued around him, yet Rusty seemed to understand boundaries instinctively. His focus was singular: protect the child. Every soft whine, gentle nudge, and watchful glance reinforced his silent promise. Volunteers from the local animal shelter arrived to assess Rusty's condition. They examined him for injuries, provided food and clean water, and carefully brushed the matted fur. Rusty allowed them to help, though he kept a vigilant eye on Liam at all times. It was clear that Rusty was beginning to understand humans in a new light. They could be allies, protectors, and sources of warmth. But trust remained cautious, carefully measured, given only when Rusty deemed it safe. Meanwhile, the neighborhood buzzed with news of Rusty's heroics. Social media posts flooded in. Local news outlets interviewed neighbors, and people spoke of the brave brown stray who had saved a child's life. Yet Rusty paid little attention to fame or recognition. For him, this was never about acknowledgement. It was about loyalty, courage, and responsibility. His actions had already defined him, and the gratitude of those around him, while acknowledged, was secondary to the bond he had forged with Liam. As the day progressed, Liam began to respond more actively. He reached out for Rusty repeatedly, recognizing the dog who had protected him during his moment of vulnerability. Rusty remained calm, patient, and observant. Every movement was deliberate, every nudge and sniff carefully calculated to provide reassurance. The hospital room, which had once been a space of sterile white walls and tense monitors, now felt warm, alive, and full of trust. A testament to the quiet heroism of a stray dog whose courage had altered the course of one family's life. Emily watched as Liam and Rusty interacted. Her heart swelled with gratitude and awe. The dog had saved her son, but in these moments she saw something more profound, a transformation. Rusty was no longer a stray wandering the streets. He was part of their family, an integral presence who had demonstrated loyalty, intelligence, and bravery beyond measure. She whispered softly, "We owe you everything, Rusty. And now we want to give you a home." Later that afternoon, doctors cleared Liam for continued recovery at home, provided with careful instructions for his care. Emily prepared to leave the hospital, and Rusty followed cautiously, aware of the unfamiliar environment outside the room. Volunteers gently guided him into a temporary leash, and Rusty, though hesitant, allowed them to lead him. His gaze remained fixed on Liam, who clutched his mother's hand and pointed toward the dog. Rusty's instincts reminded him. This child was his responsibility, and he would not abandon him, no matter the changes in surroundings. The drive home was slow and deliberate. Rusty sat quietly in the backseat, ears pricked and eyes alert, occasionally glancing toward Liam as if confirming the boy's safety. Emily spoke softly to him, explaining the new home and the care that awaited him. Rusty, though unable to understand words fully, recognized the tone, calm, reassuring, and filled with love. Trust had begun to take root, delicate yet undeniable. The journey from street stray to guardian companion was unfolding, one cautious step at a time. At their home, the neighborhood watched with quiet curiosity. Some neighbors remembered Rusty from the streets, others had followed the news online. Emily opened the front gate slowly, allowing Rusty to step into a yard filled with soft grass, warm sunlight, and familiar smells that were new yet comforting. Rusty paused, sniffed carefully, and then approached Liam, who ran forward eagerly, arms outstretched. Rusty lowered his head, allowing the boy to hug him tightly. The bond had solidified, no words were necessary. Protection and gratitude existed in the shared gaze, in the gentle nuzzles, and in the quiet understanding between human and dog. Over the next several hours, Rusty explored his temporary surroundings cautiously. Every corner, every shadow, every unfamiliar object was examined carefully. Emily prepared a warm meal and soft bedding, ensuring Rusty's comfort. Volunteers continued to check on him, and the neighborhood maintained a respectful distance, observing quietly. Rusty, though still wary, allowed himself moments of relaxation, curling up near Liam's bed as the boy rested. For the first time in his life, Rusty had a place where he felt safe, valued, and essential. By nightfall, the family had settled into a calm routine. Liam slept soundly under a warm blanket, Rusty at his side, ears occasionally flicking in response to distant sounds. Emily sat nearby, marveling at the transformation. A dog who had lived on the streets, surviving day to day with caution and fear, had become a guardian, a companion, and a hero. Rusty had acted selflessly, demonstrating courage and loyalty that few humans could match. The journey of healing and trust had only begun, but one thing was certain: Rusty was now a permanent part of their lives. As the lights dimmed and the quiet of night settled over the house, Rusty remained alert yet calm, a silent protector who had stepped from the shadows of the streets into the warmth of a family who needed him as much as he needed them. The journey from stray to hero, from outsider to guardian, had been long and perilous, but the bond forged in those critical hours would define the rest of their lives. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Carter home, illuminating the warm interior with golden light. Liam stirred in his bed, rubbing his eyes as he reached instinctively for the familiar presence beside him, Rusty. The scruffy brown dog had slept curled near Liam all night, occasionally lifting his head to scan the house for any sign of danger. After days of chaos, uncertainty, and hospital alarms, the room was finally filled with calm, a stark contrast to the tension that had gripped Columbus just days earlier. Emily watched as her son reached for Rusty, and her heart swelled. The bond between child and dog had grown in hours, yet it felt as though they had known each other forever. Rusty, cautious yet attentive, nudged Liam gently with his snout, pressing close to ensure the boy felt safe. The family had begun to understand the depth of Rusty's bravery. The dog had saved Liam's life without hesitation, fear, or thought of reward. Now he was fully present, offering quiet companionship and protection. Word of Rusty's heroics continued to spread. Neighbors had left messages, treats, and toys outside the Carter home, curious to witness the dog who had acted so selflessly. Volunteers from local shelters arrived to provide assistance, offering advice on care and ensuring Rusty's health and safety. They brought grooming supplies, clean bedding, and nutritious food, all intended to help the stray adjust to a home environment for the first time. Rusty accepted these offerings carefully, sniffing and investigating, but never straying far from Liam's side. Emily decided it was time for the community to meet the hero dog who had changed their lives. She organized a small gathering in the backyard, inviting neighbors and volunteers who had assisted in Rusty's rescue. The yard was filled with laughter, soft chatter, and the scent of fresh flowers and autumn leaves. Rusty, cautious as ever, remained near Liam, ears flicking at every new sound. The boy's excitement was palpable. He wanted to show everyone the dog who had saved him, the guardian who had refused to leave him alone. When the first guests arrived, Rusty's instincts immediately kicked in. He circled Liam, nudging him gently as if to say, "Stay close." Volunteers approached slowly, offering calm voices and gentle gestures. Rusty remained alert but gradually began to relax, understanding that these humans posed no threat. Children ran to greet him, cautiously extending their hands. Rusty sniffed and allowed brief interaction, but his gaze continually returned to Liam, ensuring the boy's safety above all else. As the gathering continued, Emily shared the story of Rusty's heroism. She recounted the moment Liam had collapsed on Maple Street, Rusty's relentless barking, his protective nudges, and his refusal to leave the boy until help arrived. Tears glistened in the eyes of neighbors and volunteers alike. Some whispered in awe, others wiped away tears, and a few children exclaimed, "That's the bravest dog ever." Rusty's presence seemed almost ceremonial, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had begun with life-and-death urgency. Liam, now fully awake and animated, knelt in the leaves near Rusty, brushing dirt from his fur and speaking softly. "You saved me, Rusty," he said in his small, earnest voice. "I was scared, but you were brave." Rusty tilted his head, ears flicking as if understanding every word. He nudged Liam gently in return, a quiet affirmation of their connection. The boy hugged him, pressing his cheek to Rusty's matted coat. The neighborhood watched in awe, recognizing a moment that transcended words. Trust, loyalty, and gratitude embodied in the bond between child and dog. Emily realized that Rusty's story was more than just a heroic act. It was a lesson in courage, empathy, and the unexpected ways love could manifest. She decided to make Rusty part of their family officially. After consulting with volunteers and shelter representatives, she arranged for his adoption, ensuring Rusty would have a permanent home, access to veterinary care, and the freedom to remain near Liam at all times. Rusty, though still wary of some strangers, responded to this decision with quiet acceptance. He had made his choice when he saved Liam, and now the family reciprocated. The community celebration continued into the afternoon. Neighbors shared stories of Rusty's past, sightings on the streets, small acts of cleverness, and moments of mischief. Yet all agreed that none of that compared to the courage displayed during Liam's crisis. Volunteers presented gifts, a soft bed, nutritious food, and a small tag engraved with Rusty's new name. Though the dog could not read, he recognized the significance in the voices, gestures, and warmth surrounding him. Trust had been earned and returned. Liam's laughter filled the backyard as he played with Rusty, tossing a ball carefully and calling out. Rusty retrieved it diligently, always returning to Liam, keeping close watch. Emily marveled at the scene. A child once vulnerable and afraid, now safe, joyful, and thriving, alongside the dog whose bravery had saved him. She knew that the impact of this bond would extend far beyond the streets of Columbus. It would shape their lives, teach lessons in compassion, and inspire others in ways she could not yet fully comprehend. By late afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Rusty had grown comfortable enough to rest near Liam's feet while the boy played. The once fearful stray had discovered a new world, one of safety, love, and belonging. He had acted heroically when no one else had, and now he was receiving the care, attention, and respect he deserved. The journey from abandoned stray to cherished family member was complete, and yet it felt like only the beginning. Emily looked on, heart full, and whispered to Rusty, "You are our hero every single day." Rusty lifted his head, ears flicking, and rested his gaze on her. In that moment there was understanding, a recognition that the past had been harsh, the present was secure, and the future held promise. The bond forged in crisis had solidified into love, trust, and loyalty that would endure for a lifetime. The neighborhood, inspired by Rusty's story, began sharing the tale widely. Schools, shelters, and local news outlets featured him as an example of bravery, intelligence, and compassion. Volunteers coordinated efforts to help other stray animals, motivated by the courage of a dog who had acted without expectation, whose actions had changed a child's life forever. Rusty, indifferent to fame, remained focused on Liam, proving that true heroism needed no recognition, only action. As night fell over Columbus, the cart's home was filled with warmth and quiet contentment. Liam rested peacefully, Rusty curled nearby, and Emily reflected on the extraordinary events that had begun on a quiet autumn sidewalk. A child had been saved, a dog had discovered purpose, and a community had been reminded of the extraordinary ways in which courage and loyalty could manifest. The hero of Maple Street had finally found a home, and in doing so had given a family something they could never forget: life, love, and hope. Days turned into weeks, and Rusty's transition from scrappy street dog to cherished family companion was nothing short of remarkable. Liam's laughter echoed through the house as he ran from room to room, Rusty close at his heels, ears perked, eyes bright with unwavering focus. The boy had recovered fully, but the experience had left an indelible bond between him and the scruffy brown dog, who had once saved his life on a quiet Columbus sidewalk. Every glance, every nudge, every wag of Rusty's tail reminded Emily of the hero who had appeared when they needed him most. Rusty, for his part, adjusted to his new life cautiously but confidently. The streets had once been his world, filled with the sharp scent of danger, the uncertainty of food, and the constant need to survive. Now his senses remained alert, but the threats were gone. Instead, there were gentle hands, warm food, soft bedding, and the steady heartbeat of a child who trusted him completely. Rusty's courage had been proven on Maple Street, yet it was his loyalty that truly shone now, the unspoken promise that he would never leave Liam's side. Emily had transformed her home to accommodate Rusty comfortably. A corner of the living room was now dedicated to him, with a plush bed, toys, and a small bowl of fresh water always within reach. Volunteers from the local shelter continued to visit, ensuring his health was monitored and providing guidance on dog care. Rusty allowed these interactions, moving with quiet grace and dignity. Though wary of strangers initially, he had learned to recognize kindness and respond to it. His experiences on the streets had made him cautious, but the bond with Liam and Emily had begun to reshape his understanding of the world. Liam's recovery was steady and full of joy. He now woke each morning eager to greet Rusty, sometimes crawling into bed with him for a few precious minutes of cuddles before breakfast. The two became inseparable, playing in the yard, walking together through the neighborhood, and exploring every corner of the house. Rusty's protective instincts never faded. He remained vigilant, alert to the slightest sound that might signal danger. Yet alongside that vigilance was a softness, a trust, and a willingness to share his world with the family that had welcomed him unconditionally. Emily often reflected on the extraordinary circumstances that had brought Rusty into their lives. A stray dog, disregarded by the community, had saved her son from what could have been a devastating accident. And in that act of heroism, a family had been formed. The local news had covered Rusty's story extensively, and he became a symbol of courage and loyalty, inspiring neighbors and strangers alike. Yet for Emily and Liam, Rusty's true significance was intimate and profound. He was no longer just a hero, he was family. The community remained captivated by Rusty's story. Children visited with their parents to see the dog who had saved Liam, volunteers shared updates on his adjustment, and neighbors frequently left treats and small gifts on the Carter porch. Rusty accepted these gestures selectively, always returning to Liam, ensuring that the boy remained his priority. His fame mattered little to him. What mattered was trust, protection, and the bond he had forged with the boy who had once been alone and vulnerable. As autumn turned to winter, Rusty's loyalty deepened. Snow fell gently across Columbus, dusting the neighborhood streets in white. Liam and Rusty played outside for hours, Rusty bounding through snowdrifts, occasionally pausing to make sure Liam was safe. Emily watched from the window, sipping hot cocoa, marveling at the transformation. The dog who had once been invisible on the streets now brought life, laughter, and a sense of security to the family. His courage had saved Liam, but his presence now provided something even greater: love, stability, and companionship. One evening, as the family sat by the fireplace, Liam leaned against Rusty, resting his head against the dog's soft fur. Emily stroked Rusty's back gently. "You know," she said softly, "you saved more than Liam's life. You saved our hearts, too." Rusty lifted his head, ears flicking, and gazed at her with quiet understanding. He had never understood words, yet he sensed the sentiment in her tone, the warmth of her hand, and the deep bond that had been forged in a single, life-altering moment. The hospital visits, The frantic ambulance ride, the uncertainty on Maple Street, all of it seemed like a distant memory now. Rusty had stepped from fear into trust, from survival into purpose, and from anonymity into love. And yet, even in this new life, his instincts remained sharp. He was always aware, always vigilant, but the constant threat that had defined his life on the streets had been replaced by the gentle rhythm of family life, secure and predictable, yet full of joy. Emily often thought about the broader impact of Rusty's heroism. His story had inspired the neighborhood, encouraging people to help other strays, to notice the overlooked, and to act when someone was in need. Rusty's courage demonstrated that heroism could appear in the most unexpected forms, and that loyalty and love were universal, transcending species. The scruffy brown dog who had saved her child had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that courage often comes quietly, in small acts that change lives forever. Months later, Rusty's presence in the Carter home had become routine but no less meaningful. Liam laughed, played, and thrived, confident in the unwavering support of his protector. Rusty accompanied him everywhere, to the park, on walks through the neighborhood, and even quietly observing at school pickups from a safe distance. His heroics on Maple Street had defined the beginning of this chapter, but the continued bond with Liam cemented his role as a true guardian. Every day, the boy and the dog reaffirmed the unspoken promise that had begun on that fateful afternoon. Loyalty, protection, and love would never waver. And in the quiet moments, when the house was still, when the snow fell softly, or when the wind whispered through the trees, Rusty would rest near Liam, ears twitching, eyes alert yet peaceful. The streets that had once been his world, filled with danger and uncertainty, were behind him. The family that had once been strangers were now everything, his companions, his protectors, and those he had sworn to guard. In return, they loved him unconditionally, honoring the courage and selflessness that had first defined him as a hero. Rusty's journey from abandoned stray to street survivor to guardian and beloved family member was complete. He had acted heroically when it mattered most, saving a small child's life and earning the trust and love of an entire family. And though he could not speak, his actions communicated more than words ever could. Courage is found in those willing to act. Love is expressed in loyalty and protection, and a single act of bravery can change countless lives. As the night fell over Columbus, the Carter home glowed with warmth, laughter, and quiet contentment. Liam slept soundly under a soft blanket, Rusty curled protectively at his side. Emily reflected on the incredible chain of events that had brought them together, and a sense of peace washed over her. The dog who had once been alone on the streets had now found a family, purpose, and love. And in the heart of a scruffy brown dog, a hero's journey had reached its happy ending. The streets of Columbus would remember Rusty as the stray who saved a child. The community would celebrate his courage, and the family would cherish every moment with him. But for Rusty, the story was simple. He had found his place, fulfilled his promise, and discovered the warmth of a home, a hero not for fame, but for the life he had saved, the boy he had protected, and the love he had earned.